It's day one of the celebrity trial gripping much of the nation. Sean Diddy Combs, once one of entertainment's most powerful moguls, accused of crimes so heinous, he faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. He's denied all charges, and just a warning, this story contains accounts, descriptions, and visual content of actual or alleged events that some may find disturbing.
The music industry was rocked to its core last month when former insider Thomas Reynolds broke his decade-long silence. For years, rumors had swirled around music mogul Sean Diddy Combs and his business practices, but nothing substantial had ever emerged beyond industry whispers. That all changed when Reynolds, once part of Diddy's inner circle, sat down for an explosive 3-hour interview with investigative journalist Elena Cortez. "I've carried this weight for too long," Reynolds began, his voice steady, but his hands visibly trembling. "There comes a point where silence becomes complicity. And I reached that point when I saw history about to repeat itself." For those unfamiliar with Thomas Reynolds, his name rarely appeared in headlines, but his fingerprints were all over some of the biggest moments in hip-hop over the last 15 years. As a former legal consultant who worked with several major labels, Reynolds had unique access to the behind-the-scenes machinery that powers the careers of our biggest stars. His proximity to power gave him a front-row seat to what he describes as systematic patterns of influence and control. The interview that has the industry reeling focused particularly on what Reynolds calls the witness protocol, an alleged playbook for neutralizing potential legal threats before they reach the courtroom. When someone emerges with information that could damage someone at Diddy's level, there's an immediate response that activates, Reynolds explained, his tone clinical and detached. "It's not emotional or chaotic, it's methodical, like a corporate crisis management plan, but with personal stakes." What makes Reynolds' account so compelling isn't just what he alleges, it's the meticulous, almost forensic way he describes complex systems of influence that he claims operate within the music industry's highest echelons. Throughout his interview, he never appears angry or vindictive. Instead, there's an eerie calmness as he unpacks what he describes as the playbook. "The first phase is intelligence gathering," Reynolds detailed. "Every aspect of this person's life gets mapped out: their financial situation, personal relationships, career aspirations, past mistakes, digital footprint. They're looking for pressure points. What does this person value? What are they afraid of losing? What secrets would they prefer to keep private?" Industry analyst Dr. Samantha Wright, who has studied power dynamics in entertainment for over 20 years, finds Reynolds' descriptions consistent with patterns she's observed. What he's describing isn't unique to the music industry or to any specific individual within it. These are power maintenance tactics that exist wherever there are significant imbalances of influence and resources. Reynolds' most specific allegations involve a potential witness he calls Vanessa, not her real name, who he claims had information relevant to a lawsuit against Diddy that was settled out of court in 2018. Vanessa was in a unique position. She had been present at several key events and had documentation that could have substantially changed the trajectory of the case, Reynolds explained. What happened next was the containment protocol in action. According to Reynolds, within 48 hours of Vanessa's name appearing in pretrial documentation, 3 seemingly unrelated events occurred. First, a music producer she had worked with years earlier suddenly reached out about collaborating on a project with significant upfront payment. Second, a minor legal issue from her past, a licensing dispute that had been dormant for years, suddenly resurfaced with a letter from an attorney. And third, she was invited to an industry event where she was seated at the same table as several influential executives. In isolation, any one of those things could be coincidence, Reynolds acknowledged. Together, they created a perfect storm of incentives and pressures. The opportunity represented career advancement, the legal issue represented risk, and the dinner introduced her to people who could influence both. Within 2 weeks, her attorney informed the plaintiff's legal team that she was no longer willing to testify. What makes Reynolds' account particularly unsettling is his insistence that these tactics aren't unique to Diddy, but represent standard operating procedure among the industry's power players. According to Reynolds, what varies isn't the playbook, but the resources available to execute it. There are firms that specialize in what they euphemistically call reputation management. But what amounts to information control, Reynolds claimed. When a potential witness emerges, these firms deploy a multi-layered strategy to shape the digital environment around that person. This strategy, according to Reynolds, includes surveillance of communications and social media, development of alternative narratives about the person, and what he calls digital ecosystem management, controlling what information appears when people search for this person. Much of it exists in gray areas, Reynolds explained. Using publicly available information isn't illegal. Creating content isn't illegal. Search engine optimization isn't illegal. But the coordinated application of these techniques, specifically to influence a potential witness, that's where ethical and potentially legal boundaries get crossed. Throughout his interview, Reynolds provides specific examples of these tactics, being careful to note when he had direct knowledge versus when he was sharing information he had heard from others. This methodical approach to his allegations makes them difficult to dismiss outright, even as Diddy's legal team has vehemently denied all claims. One of the most discussed segments of Reynolds' interview involves what he calls the community leverage, the use of philanthropic relationships to exert influence. The strategic use of philanthropy creates powerful leverage, Reynolds stated. When someone has donated to your child's school, funded your community center, or supported the medical research that might save your parent's life, it creates a psychological debt that's difficult to overcome. When asked if he was suggesting that charitable work is done with ulterior motives, Reynolds was careful with his response. "I'm suggesting that genuine charitable work creates networks of influence that can be activated when needed. I've sat in meetings where potential witnesses were mapped out in terms of their community connections. This person's church received funding from Foundation X. This person's daughter got a scholarship from Initiative Y. These weren't coincidences. They were strategic investments in potential leverage." Dr. Wright finds this aspect of Reynolds' account particularly credible. Philanthropy has always served dual purposes: genuine social good and relationship building. What's troubling isn't the existence of these networks, but their potential weaponization in legal contexts. What gives Reynolds' interview such weight isn't just the content of his claims, it's the meticulous detail with which he recounts them. He provides approximate dates, locations, and specific conversations that lend credibility to his account. And perhaps most compelling is his explanation for why he's coming forward now, years after leaving the industry. "I've spent 3 years in therapy processing my role in these systems," Reynolds revealed, his composure briefly cracking. "I wasn't just an observer, I was a participant. I sat in rooms where these strategies were discussed. I helped identify pressure points in people's lives that could be leveraged. I rationalized it as business, as protection, as anything but what it was: the systematic silencing of people who had legitimate information about troubling behavior." When asked what changed for him, Reynolds described a chance encounter that forced him to confront his own complicity. "I ran into someone, I won't say who, whose career and personal life had been effectively destroyed after they refused to be contained. Seeing the long-term human impact of these systems forced me to confront my own role. There's a moment when you have to decide what kind of person you want to be, what you're willing to carry. I couldn't carry this anymore." Reynolds acknowledges the risks of speaking out. "Every day since I left the industry, I've lived with the expectation that the same playbook might be used against me. That's part of how these systems perpetuate, through the fear they generate. At some point, you have to decide that speaking your truth is worth whatever comes next." In the weeks since Reynolds' interview was released, the response has been seismic. Industry figures have largely remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his allegations. Diddy's legal team has announced plans to sue for defamation, calling Reynolds' claims the fabrications of a disgruntled former consultant seeking publicity. Several former artists and employees have come forward with statements supporting Diddy, describing him as tough but fair, and expressing skepticism about Reynolds' characterization. Others have offered more measured responses, acknowledging that power imbalances exist in the industry without specifically addressing Reynolds' allegations. Entertainment attorney Michelle Garcia, who has represented both artists and executives but has no connection to either Reynolds or Diddy, offers a balanced perspective. The music industry, like many entertainment sectors, operates through relationships and influence. That's not inherently sinister. The question is whether those relationships and that influence cross legal and ethical boundaries in specific cases. What makes this story so compelling and so disturbing if true isn't any single revelation. It's the systematic nature of what Reynolds describes. the application of corporate-style crisis management techniques to personal legal matters. It's a glimpse behind the curtain of celebrity justice that forces us to question whether our legal system truly provides equal protection when wealth and influence enter the equation. The most dangerous systems aren't the ones that operate through explicit threats or violence, Reynolds observed near the end of his interview. They're the ones that operate through incentives, relationships, and the careful management of consequences. They're effective because they don't feel like systems of control to those within them. They feel like the way things work. Dr. Wright agrees with this assessment. What Reynolds is describing is how power maintains itself in the modern era, not through crude intimidation, but through sophisticated influence networks. The question for our society is whether we're comfortable with justice being potentially shaped by these networks. For his part, Reynolds seems to have made peace with whatever consequences might come from his decision to speak out. "I'm not claiming to be a hero or a whistleblower," he said. "I was part of this system. I benefited from it. I'm simply trying to do what I can now to shed light on mechanisms that I believe undermine accountability." As the legal battle between Reynolds and Diddy's team looms, the broader conversation his allegations have sparked continues to reverberate through the industry. Artists are asking more questions about their legal representation. Journalists are digging deeper into how influence shapes coverage. And the public is gaining a more nuanced understanding of how power operates in the shadows of the entertainment world. Whether or not every detail of Reynolds' account is proven, Dr. Wright concludes, he's pulled back the curtain on systems that thrive in darkness. That alone makes his testimony significant, regardless of how the legal proceedings unfold. For those who have long observed the music industry's power dynamics, Reynolds' interview offers confirmation of what many have suspected, but few have articulated so clearly. For others, it provides a disturbing education in how influence can potentially distort justice. And for everyone, it raises profound questions about accountability in a world where power and wealth can shape not just what stories get told, but who gets to tell them. As one industry veteran who requested anonymity put it, "The truth about Reynolds' claims may never be fully established in court, but he's already accomplished something important. He's made it harder for these systems to operate without scrutiny. And in an industry built on perception management, that kind of spotlight is what power fears most." The coming months will likely bring legal battles, counter-narratives, and intense scrutiny of both Reynolds and his claims. But regardless of the outcome, his decision to speak out has already changed the conversation around power, accountability, and justice in the entertainment industry. Whether that change leads to meaningful reform or simply more sophisticated methods of influence remains to be seen. What's certain is that Reynolds' account has forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about how justice functions when it collides with wealth and influence. In doing so, he's challenged not just specific individuals or practices, but our collective willingness to accept the way things work, when that acceptance might come at the cost of truth and accountability. "I don't expect everyone to believe me," Reynolds said in the final moments of his interview. "I don't even expect things to change overnight. I just couldn't stay silent anymore while watching the same patterns repeat with new victims. Sometimes speaking up is its own victory, regardless of what happens next." For an industry built on controlling narratives, that might be the most disruptive act of all. The simple, profound decision to tell a story that power would prefer remained untold.